Game Change is a 2012 HBO movie about the 2008 presidential election. It was made by the same team that had made Recount, another HBO movie about another presidential election. That's director Jay Roach and writer Danny Strong. I really loved Recount, so when I found out that the same team had produced another movie, I made a point of seeking this out. Now, I didn't have HBO at the time, but I was living in Cambodia and I got a pirated DVD off of one of the DVD shops in Cambodia and watched the movie. It's based off a book, Game Change, by John Hilleman and Mark Helperman, which I didn't realize this until I was looking at Wikipedia just now before filming this video, but I actually have this book on my shelf. And the reason I didn't realize it was the same book is because this book is titled Race of a Lifetime, but it turns out there's a difference in the title between the American version and the British version. And because I'm living abroad, I've picked up, I guess, the British publication. I've held this book up on camera before during one of my weekly reading vlogs, mentioning it as a book haul. I'll try and find that video and link to it in the description down below. But I actually picked this book up because it was at a book exchange at work. I flipped through it and just reading a few paragraphs and a few random pages, I realized it was very well written and looked like it could be quite entertaining. Like it's a political reporting book, but written in a narrative style, recounting conversations, that kind of thing. So I picked it up and I've been meaning to read it. I haven't gotten around to it yet. Now, just flipping through this book, and again, I haven't read it yet, but just flipping through it, it looks like this book is on the whole presidential election. The primaries, the Democratic primaries, the Republican primaries, Obama and Hillary stories, etc. Based on the Wikipedia page, the HBO team was reading this book, and there were a number of stories they were interested in pursuing. They almost made the story about the Hillary Obama primary, but decided it was too long and too complex. So they focused on the Sarah Palin aspect of it. So the Sarah Palin aspect, if you remember from 2008, is that John McCain was behind in the polls to Barack Obama. So they went with a political outsider, the governor of Alaska, who was locally known but not nationally known at that time, to excite the campaign, and it worked. She was a charismatic speaker. She excited the women's base in the Republican movement, and because she was new and different, and it was novel to have a straight talking person and a woman on the ticket, she boosted McCain's poll numbers to the point where he was almost even with Obama, and it looked for one brief moment like McCain might actually have a shot at winning the 2008 presidential election, in spite of all the disadvantages his campaign was running under. And just to refresh our memories, those disadvantages were, first of all, Barack Obama's cult of personality and his superstardom, which had excited the Democratic base and the independents in 2008. And also because of 8 years of the Bush years and the war that was drawing out and the financial crash, the Republican brand was tarnished. Although the financial crash didn't happen until late in that election year, didn't it? Sorry, I'm forgetting my chronology. But anyways, looked for a brief moment, like the Republicans, McCain might actually win the thing. But then Sarah Palin had a number of disastrous TV appearances, a couple of them in particular, which made a lot of people think that she was a hindrance to the John McCain campaign instead of an asset. And John McCain lost that campaign, although a point that the movie makes clear, and a point I think most people agree with, that may have happened anyways. Or I think as the movie frames it, he almost definitely would have lost anyways. The if they had chosen a traditional running mate, he still wouldn't have had a chance. Sarah Palin was kind of like the wild card that almost gave them a chance at winning. So it's I'm a sucker for these political dramas, and I know not everybody is, but if you like these kind of things, you should like these kind of things. Uh, the dialogue is very good. The writer does a very good job of taking a number of complex political issues and laying them out in the dialogue in a very economical way that makes things very easy to follow and streamline. And it's a very good political explainer. The acting was great. You had Julianne Moore as Sarah Palin, who just had her down to a T. Woody Harrelson as Steve Schmidt, McCain's advisor, who Woody Harrelson does a great job here. Ed Harris as John McCain, who, yeah, they all do a great job. So the dialogue is good, the acting was good. Despite this, and despite admittedly being a fan of the genre, I did find myself being bored a little bit in the middle of the film. Now, this is one of those films where if you watch clips of it on YouTube, the clips are all great. And if you watch it and then you think back to like the highlights of the movie a couple days later, there are a number of highlights in this movie which make me remember it quite fondly looking back to it. But at the time, first time I sat down to watch it, I did feel bored in the middle. Beginning was fantastic, ending was fantastic. The middle bored me, and I had a little bit of a hard time putting my finger on exactly why that was. It could have just been me, but I think, well, there's a couple things going on. First of all, it's very episodic. The middle of the movie focused on a number of different events, and they had the build up to those events, and then the events, and then we go on to the next event. So there's the build up to the Charlie Rose interview, and then there's the Charlie Rose interview itself. There's the build up to the Katie Couric interview, and then there's the Katie Couric interview itself. There's the build up to the vice presidential debates, and then the vice presidential debates themselves. So there's a series of build up, climax, build up, climax, build up, climax. And, a normal story arc is building up to a single climax. I think this just, maybe on a subconscious level, I was revolting against that kind of storytelling, or maybe I just got a little bit exhausted with the build up, climax, or maybe it's just me. Let me know what you thought of the movie. The other thing is, especially when this movie came out in 2012, I saw it in early 2013. It was maybe a little bit too recent because all of these clips were on YouTube. A point that they made in that movie, which is something I hadn't really fully realized, I guess, is that this was the first presidential campaign to be taking place in the age of YouTube. I guess now in 2024, YouTube is kind of old news, right? All the kids are on TikTok now or whatever. But this was when YouTube was big. And they talked about how YouTube was changing the news cycle. And that was interesting. I hadn't really thought about that much in depth before. It's an interesting point, but the corollary of that is all of these clips were available on YouTube. I wasn't even living in the US in the 2008 campaign. I was living in Japan at the time. But Katie Couric interview, the Charlie Kirk interview, I saw them all on YouTube. In fact, the highlights of those interviews, the parts where Sarah Palin was just saying ridiculously stupid things, I watched those repeatedly. As I think did a lot of Democrats, if we're being honest. I think a lot of us were addicted to Sarah Palin cringe It made us feel smugly superior. I don't know. Um, so you know, I had those interviews just down pat in the back of my head. So to see them dramatized again on this movie was less interesting for me. I already knew what they were going to say. Now, ultimately, because it's a political drama about recent history, we all ultimately know what the ending is going to be, anyways. And that was also true of the 2004 movie Recount, which was recounting the 2000 election, which again was by the same team. But in the case of Recount, uh, it was a lot of behind the scenes talk. And to the extent that there were news clips being shown, again, 2000 was before YouTube, so these were not clips that had gotten endlessly played over and over again on YouTube, at least not at the time. So Recount was able to get away with milking the drama of the scene, I think, a little bit better than Game Change was. Now, that being said, it is now 2024, so maybe it's time to give this movie another try. And I always think when I'm talking about these movies or watching these movies, how well are they going to be received by the next generation? Now, the most likely explanation is that they're going to be completely forgotten by the next generation, because that's what happens with most political movies. We remember the ones that survive because that's just the survivorship bias. So, for example, in the Nixon era, we remember All the President's Men, but there are any number of TV movies about Watergate that came out during the 1970s and early 80s that nobody talks about now. Nobody remembers. And so that could well be the fate of this movie. But speaking of All the President's Men, I mean, I was born after Watergate. I took a course on 20th century American history in college, in which we had to study Watergate. And Watergate is, I guess it's like a lot of political things. It's very simple in the broad strokes. You know, the president tried to cover up a break-in and had to resign. But if you get into the details about who said what when and who knew what and who reported to who, then it becomes very complex. And I remember listening to a lecture on Watergate in which I got completely lost in the middle of that lecture. And so me and a couple of my classmates rented All the President's Men as a way to review for the test and try and keep all these different players straight. Sorry, I'm going on a bit of a digression, aren't I? I'm not talking about All the President's Men in this video. I'm talking about Game Change. But that experience always makes me wonder, you know, in 20 years or maybe even now, are college students studying the 2008 election? And if so, I imagine that if this movie is still being watched out there somewhere, this would be a very educational movie about what happens during the 2008 election. Now, it has been accused of bias. So it is a movie that is sympathetic to Sarah Palin, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but portrays her as completely unfit for the position. So it's a movie that it's essentially, were it to be believed, would completely crash her political career. And Sarah Palin's political career actually has largely crashed, hasn't it? I mean, we'll see if she gets a second act later. She's still alive, so we can't write her off yet. But at the moment, it looks like her political career is over. And I wonder a little bit if this movie contributed to that. I don't know. But it's, like I said, it's based off of this book. But the writer and director also did 24 interviews with people to get extra info for the movie, apparently. And Some of the people involved have said that the movie is accurate, and some of them have not. Sarah Palin's advisors have said that the movie was not accurate. Sarah Palin herself has refused to watch the movie, but said it wasn't accurate. And I think some of the guys who were tasked with prepping Sarah Palin and giving her her political education have said it wasn't accurate. The people who have said this movie was accurate, though, were McCain's advisors. In particular, Steve Schmidt and what's the name of the other one? Sorry, I've got the Wikipedia. Nicole Wallace. Steve Schmidt and Nicole Wallace have vouched for the accuracy of this movie. And Steve Schmidt, who's played by Woody Harrelson, is pretty much the main character of this movie. Now, how much they have an axe to grind is, I guess you'll have to decide that for yourself. Steve Schmidt has been a Republican, but he was, what was the name of that Republican group that was against Trump? He was part of the Lincoln Project. He's considers himself a conservative, but has taken an embattled position within the conservative camp. And speaking of Steve Schmidt, there's been some interesting things that have come out after this movie came out. Like just last year, I believe, he got into a Twitter spat with Meghan McCain because Meghan McCain had liked a tweet that had said that Steve Schmidt was a pedophile. And now, disclaimer alert, I don't believe there's any evidence that Steve Schmidt is a pedophile, but Meghan McCain had liked a tweet that said that, and then Steve Schmidt had just gone nuts on Twitter, unloading a bunch of stuff on Meghan McCain, which went into podcasts and interviews, and in which he divulged, number one, that Meghan McCain was a spoiled brat. I guess this was a long-standing beef that they had. And number two, John McCain had been having an affair during this 2008 election, which Steve Schmidt had been tasked with covering up. And it's something he had kept his mouth shut about loyally, about this whole thing so as not to tarnish McCain's image. But he was so upset at Meghan McCain that I guess he wanted to unload his dirt on the family. So that was another, if you like political drama, break out the popcorn. That was another little interesting thing that was happening just last year. Now, none of that's in the movie. Meghan McCain's not even in the movie. You wonder if that could have been fit into the movie had it been known at the time. But I'm digressing again, aren't I? I need to come back and talk about this movie. So, Steve Schmidt and Nicole Wallace, who are largely the central figures in this movie and who it's based on their point of view, McCain's top advisors, have vouched numerous times that from their perspective, this movie is completely accurate, compresses things for time, etc. But they thought it was a very realistic portrayal of Sarah Palin. So, Sarah Palin in this movie comes off as completely ignorant. And some of this was rumored at the time. That there were these little leaks to the press. But as she's portrayed in the movie, she didn't know what the Federal Reserve was. She didn't understand the difference between the war that was happening in Iraq and the war that was happening in Afghanistan. She didn't realize that Korea was two separate countries, North Korea and South Korea. She didn't understand anything about history, even 20th century history. She didn't understand who the United States was fighting against in World War II. She didn't understand the difference between the Axis powers and the Allied powers. And once they realized this gap in the knowledge, they went on this big campaign to educate her. She went into these cram sessions with these tutors. This is all dramatized in the movie. And I should note again that one of the tutors said that this movie wasn't accurate. So take that with a grain of salt. Take that for what it's worth, I think is the expression I want to use. Excuse me. Um, but where was I? Sarah Palin, to her credit, is portrayed on this movie as being very enthusiastic about learning and finding it all fascinating. But she couldn't remember any of it. They'd pump her full of all these details, and then, despite appearing to be very eager and ready to learn it, she would just completely forget it. Now, I don't want to name any names here, but I have, in my life, encountered people like this. I really hope they're not watching this video. But some friends and some family members I know are like this. I really hope they don't watch this video. And this was very difficult for me to understand at first, because I think I assumed that everybody thinks like I do. Right? I think that's a natural human thing to just assume that other people think like you do. And I knew not everybody was a history nerd like I was, but I just thought everybody knew the post-war presidents. You know, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and I've since encountered some people who don't really have a firm grasp on this. Sometimes even the presidents within their own lifetime, they're a little bit shady on remembering the chronology of who was elected when. And they are people who are talented in other ways, but just do not have a brain to grasp this kind of stuff. And it makes me think, okay, what is the role for these people? Are we going to exclude them from the political process? Say, okay, you know, if you can't name the last 5 presidents, you can't vote. And you certainly can't run for political office. Or are we going to say, well, okay, you know, you don't know a lot about the world, but you're passionate about some issues, and that allows you to participate in politics. And would Sarah Palin, is there some sort of knowledge test? While I'm on it, I think a secondary question is how much of this is sexism? Because there have been rumors that some of the male politicians have also had a knowledge deficit. Arguably Reagan, you see Reagan cited a lot of times, although it's interesting. I know everybody talks nowadays about how Reagan had Alzheimer's and he was just an actor who was propped up and stuff like that. But go back and watch his old speeches, or go back and watch his old interviews. You can find them on YouTube, you know, from even before he was president, from the 60s and 70s. He sounds very intelligent compared to today's modern politician. I was so young when Reagan was president, and I wasn't alive really before he was president. So this wasn't part of my own memories. But yeah, if like me, you've been brought up on the idea that Reagan was just an idiot, go back and watch his old interviews and see if that doesn't change your assessment of him. I'm digressing again, aren't I? Okay, back to the point. George W. Bush strikes me as another one who again, it was largely rumored he didn't know anything. So was there a little bit of sexism in pinpointing Sarah Palin so hard on this? But okay, but that point aside, the interesting thing about this movie is that you don't hate Sarah Palin. You see things completely from her point of view. So she did not ask to be vice president. She was asked to be vice president. And what's she going to do? I mean, she's not going to say no to that, right? If you ask her to be vice president, then yeah, of course she's going to say yes. And I mean, maybe she should have said, I'm completely unqualified to be vice president. I don't know anything. But people who don't know anything don't realize that they don't know anything, right? What do they call that? The Dunning-Kruger effect, or there's some sort of name for that. That when she and I think people like them don't realize their own deficits. So it was the responsibility of the McCain campaign to properly vet her. It wasn't. I mean, okay, maybe it was a little bit her responsibility as well. But once they went to her, of course she's going to say yes. So why didn't the McCain campaign properly vet her? And why did they choose such a wild card outsider in the first place? Well, this is all explained in the movie as well. You see it completely from their point of view. They're looking at the polls, they're running the numbers, they're seeing different scenarios. They know that there's no way they can win with a traditional candidate. They land on Sarah Palin after going through a number of other options. It's made clear in the movie that they don't have the time to vet her because of the timestamp. Because of the time constraint. So, and again, to give credit where credit is due in the movie, this is all very clearly explained in the movie with very economical dialogue. The screenwriter is doing a very good job here. Now, Sarah Palin, as the stress of the campaign mounts on her, does become verbally abusive to some of McCain's staffers. And Nicole Wallace eventually says, I do not want anything more to do with her. I'm not going to talk to her again. This is one of the main characters in the movie whose interviews have shaped this movie. He was one of McCain's staffers. And so that is not to Sarah Palin's credit. And there have been a number of things that have come out in the news since 2012 about Sarah Palin, which have not been to her credit. But again, putting aside anything from after 2012 and just focusing on the movie is strongly hinting that she has some sort of mental disorder, depressive, bipolar, something, and that the pressure of this is causing her to cascade into this depression and to lash out at people. And again, you do not get the impression that it's her fault. What you do see, again, to her credit, as portrayed in the movie, her passion, she seems genuine. She's not a charlatan, at least not as she's portrayed in this movie. She is passionate about the issues she is passionate about. These are genuine issues to her. And so, again, I think that raises the question of, is passion enough? Or do we need some sort of intelligence test or general knowledge test to get involved in politics? And again, as the movie shows to her credit, she is reaching out to segments of the Republican voter base who had been feeling ignored, who had been feeling uninspired, women, other children with Down syndrome. She had that daughter with Down syndrome who she had been caring for and had made a big part of her life story. So yeah, that was certainly to her credit. You do feel for her in this movie, and that's what makes it such a great movie. It's not just isn't Sarah Palin awful movie, or let's all laugh at Sarah Palin. It's a movie that is genuinely trying to understand what's going on here. Why did this happen, and why does each character in this drama act the way that they do? And it works good on that level. Even though Sarah Palin at the end of the movie has turned to the dark side. She has been completely seduced by the end of the movie by the celebrity stardom and the populism. And as we know now, this was laying the germs of bad things to come in American politics. But let's not go down that road now. I'm rambling too long already. Let's see. Anything else I wanted to mention here? I think I've covered it. So if you've seen this movie, let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. And I'm going to sign off here.